Ethan Carter was no stranger to danger. At 35, the American adventurer had climbed crumbling ruins in Peru, dived into sunken shipwrecks off the Bahamas, and trekked through jungles that hadn't seen a human footprint in decades. But nothing got his blood pumping like the promise of a forgotten place, a spot the world had left behind. That's what brought him to the edge of a dense forest in rural Poland, staring at the rusted, vine-choked entrance to an abandoned coal mine from World War II. The locals called it Czarny Grob, Black Grave. Ethan had heard the name whispered in a smoky bar the night before, along with warnings to stay away. Old men with weathered faces spoke of curses, of workers who never came back, of screams echoing from the earth. Ethan just grinned, tipped his beer and said, "Sounds like my kind of place." He wasn't here for ghost stories. He was here for the thrill, for the chance to uncover something no one else had touched in 80 years. Now, standing at the mine's entrance, he felt a chill that wasn't just the October air. The opening was a jagged maw in the hillside, framed by rotting wooden beams. Moss and ivy clung to the edges, like the forest was trying to swallow it whole. Ethan adjusted the straps of his backpack, packed with a flashlight, extra batteries, a GoPro camera, a multi-tool, and enough energy bars to last a couple days. He clipped the GoPro to his chest, hit record, and muttered to himself, "Let's see what you're hiding, Black Grave." The first step inside was like crossing into another world. The air turned cold and damp, heavy with the smell of wet stone and something sharper, almost chemical. His boots crunched on loose gravel as he swept his flashlight across the tunnel. The beam caught rough-hewn walls, scarred with pickaxe marks from decades past. The darkness seemed to eat the light, swallowing it just a few feet ahead. Ethan's heart kicked up a notch. "This is what I live for," he said, his voice echoing faintly. The tunnel sloped downward, narrow at first, barely wide enough for his broad shoulders. He moved slowly, scanning for signs of collapse. The mine had been sealed since the war, and he wasn't dumb enough to trust the old supports. But the deeper he went, the more the place felt wrong. The air grew thicker, pressing against his chest. The silence was too heavy, broken only by the drip of water somewhere far off. Ethan shook it off. Just nerves, he told himself. He'd been in worse spots. After 10 minutes of walking, the tunnel widened into a small chamber. His flashlight caught something on the wall. A carving, rough and uneven. He stepped closer, tracing it with his fingers. It wasn't a miner's mark or a date. It was a symbol. A circle with jagged lines radiating outward, like a twisted sun. Below it, scratched into the stone, were the words "Nie wed." Ethan didn't speak Polish, but he knew enough to guess it meant "don't enter." He chuckled, the sound flat in the dead air. Too late for that. He kept moving, the tunnel branching into 3 paths. Each one stretched into blackness, identical and uninviting. Ethan pulled a piece of chalk from his pocket and marked an X on the wall beside the middle path. "Gotta start somewhere," he muttered, stepping forward. The GoPro's red light blinked steadily, capturing every move. As he descended, the walls grew slicker, coated with a film of moisture that glistened like sweat. The chemical smell got stronger, stinging his nose. He tried to place it, ammonia, maybe, or something older, more industrial. It reminded him of his grandpa's stories about wartime factories, the kind that churned out poison gas. Ethan pushed the thought away. This was just a coal mine, nothing more. But then he heard it. A sound, faint and fleeting, like a footstep scraping against stone. He froze, swinging his flashlight behind him. The beam lit up nothing but empty tunnel. "Hello?" he called, his voice sharper than he meant it to be. No answer. Just the drip-drip of water and his own breathing, loud in his ears. He stood there for a long moment waiting, but the sound didn't come again. "Probably just rocks settling," he said, forcing a laugh. But his hand tightened around the flashlight, and he felt the weight of the darkness pressing closer. For the first time, Ethan wondered if the local stories weren't just superstition. He shook his head, angry at himself. "Get a grip, man. You've done this 100 times. Still, As he turned back to the tunnel and took another step, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching him. Something just beyond the edge of the light. The mine was alive, and it didn't want him here. Ethan's boots echoed in the narrow tunnel, each step a reminder of how deep he'd gone. The chalk X he'd scratched on the wall was long behind him, and the air felt heavier now, like it was pushing back against every breath. His flashlight cut through the dark, but the beam seemed weaker, barely reaching the slick, glistening walls. The chemical smell was stronger too, sharp enough to make his eyes water. He tried to focus on the thrill, the rush of being somewhere no one had touched in decades, but that nagging feeling of being watched wouldn't quit. "Keep it together, Ethan," he muttered, his voice swallowed by the mine. The GoPro on his chest blinked its steady red light, recording every move. He imagined the footage later, him grinning like an idiot, cracking jokes in the creepiest place he'd ever been. His YouTube subscribers would eat it up. But right now, the idea of an audience felt a million miles away. The tunnel twisted and turned, splitting into more paths than he could count. It wasn't just a mine, it was a damn labyrinth. Ethan stopped at a fork, shining his light down each branch. One path sloped upward, tight and crumbling. Another dipped sharply, water pooling at the bottom. The third was wide, with faint tracks in the dirt, like something heavy had been dragged through years ago. He pulled out his chalk and marked another X on the wall. "Number 2 it is," he said, choosing the wider path. He didn't know why, just a gut feeling. As he moved deeper, the mine changed. The walls weren't just rough stone anymore. They were reinforced with rusted metal beams, like someone had tried to make this place last. The chemical smell grew so thick it coated his throat, and he coughed, covering his mouth with his sleeve. "What the hell were they doing down here?" he said, half to himself, half to the GoPro. This wasn't just a coal mine. No way. The tunnel opened into a massive chamber, so big his flashlight couldn't reach the far wall. Ethan's jaw dropped. "Holy crap," he whispered, panning the light across the room. It was like stepping into a forgotten factory. Old wooden crates were stacked against one wall, some cracked open, spilling bits of rusted metal. A long table ran down the center, covered with glass beakers, test tubes, and bottles filled with murky liquid. A few had labels, faded and peeling, written in a language he couldn't read. Nearby, a pile of rifles, World War II relics by the look of them, lay tangled with broken ammo boxes. Everything was coated in dust, but it wasn't the kind of dust you'd expect after 80 years. It was thin, like something had disturbed this place not too long ago. Ethan's heart raced, but this time it was excitement, not fear. "Jackpot," he said, stepping toward the table. He picked up a beaker, careful not to break it. The liquid inside sloshed, thick and dark, like oil mixed with blood. He set it down fast, wiping his hand on his jeans. "Okay, that's gross." He moved to the crates, prying one open with his multi-tool. Inside were gas masks, their lenses fogged and straps rotted. Another crate held canisters, each stamped with a skull and crossbones. "Poison gas?" he said, stepping back. His grandpa's war stories flashed through his mind again. Factories churning out weapons to wipe out entire platoons. Was this one of those places? A secret Nazi lab, hidden under a coal mine? The thought sent a shiver down his spine, but it also lit a fire in him. He needed to know more. That's when he heard it again. The same scraping sound from before, like boots dragging on stone. It came from the far side of the chamber, where the light didn't reach. Ethan spun, flashlight shaking in his hand. "Who's there?" he shouted, his voice cracking. The sound stopped, but the silence that followed was worse. It felt alive, like the mine was holding its breath. He swept the beam across the room, catching shadows that seemed to shift just out of sight. "Nothing. It's nothing," he told himself, but his pulse hammered in his ears. He took a step back, bumping into the table. A test tube wobbled and fell, shattering on the floor. The liquid inside hissed, releasing a faint, acrid vapor. Ethan gagged, pulling his shirt over his nose. "Great job, dumbass," he muttered, heart pounding. Then, From the darkness came a new sound, a low, guttural moan, like someone trying to speak through a throat full of gravel. It wasn't close, but it was close enough. Ethan froze, every muscle tense. His flashlight darted toward the sound, but all he saw was the mouth of another tunnel, gaping like a black void. The moan faded, leaving only the drip of water and the thud of his own heartbeat. He wanted to run. Every instinct screamed at him to get the hell out. But Ethan Carter didn't run. Not from ruins, not from shipwrecks, and not from some creepy noise in a mine. He tightened his grip on the flashlight, chalked an X on the table to mark his spot, and headed toward the tunnel where the moan had come from. "Let's see what you're made of, Black Grave," he said, forcing a grin. But as he stepped into the dark, he couldn't shake the feeling that the mine was waiting for him, and it was hungry. Ethan's flashlight flickered as he stepped into the new tunnel, the beam stuttering like it was scared to go on. The air was colder here, thick with that chemical stink that clung to his throat. His boots splashed through shallow puddles, the water black and oily under the light. The moan he'd heard still echoed in his head, low and guttural, like a warning. He tried to laugh it off. Just the wind, right? But the words felt hollow even to him. The mine wasn't just a place anymore. It was a predator, and he was walking straight into its jaws. He kept his chalk ready, marking an X every few yards on the damp walls. The GoPro's red light blinked steadily, but the battery warning was flashing now. "Great timing," he muttered, tapping it. If it died, he'd lose his only record of this place. Not that he was sure he'd make it out to upload the footage. The thought hit him harder than he expected, and he shook it off, focusing on the tunnel ahead. It sloped downward, the walls narrowing until he had to turn sideways to squeeze through. Claustrophobia wasn't his thing, but even Ethan felt the weight of the earth pressing in. The tunnel opened into another chamber, smaller than the last but just as eerie. His flashlight swept across rusted metal cabinets, their doors hanging open like broken jaws. Papers were scattered on the floor, yellowed and curling, some stained with dark splotches that looked too much like blood. A workbench sat in the corner, littered with tools, scalpels, syringes, a hacksaw crusted with something Ethan didn't want to name. His stomach churned. "This is no coal mine," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "This is a nightmare." He stepped toward the papers, careful not to slip on the slick floor. The documents were in German, with words like experiment and subject scrawled in faded ink. Ethan's high school history class came back to him. Nazi scientists, secret labs, experiments that made your skin crawl. "No way," he said, shaking his head. But the evidence was right there, staring him in the face. This place wasn't just abandoned. It was buried on purpose. That's when he saw it, a door. Not a flimsy wooden one, but a slab of solid iron, bolted into the stone wall like it was guarding Fort Knox. It was massive, at least 8 feet tall, with a heavy padlock the size of his fist. Rust streaked its surface, but the lock looked newer, like someone had replaced it long after the war. Ethan's heart kicked into overdrive. "Now we're talking," he said, a grin creeping onto his face despite the fear. Whatever was behind that door, it was big, and he wasn't leaving without finding out what. He set his backpack down and pulled out his multi-tool, flipping it to the pry bar setting. The lock was tough, the metal cold against his fingers. He wedged the tool into the shackle and leaned in, grunting with effort. "Come on, you bastard," he growled. The lock groaned but didn't budge. Sweat beaded on his forehead, dripping into his eyes. He was about to give up when he heard it. A faint click, not from the lock, but from behind him. Ethan spun, flashlight raised like a weapon. The beam lit up the chamber, catching only shadows and dust. But he swore he'd heard something, like a breath, sharp and close. "Who's there?" he called, his voice echoing back. No answer, just the drip of water and the thud of his pulse. He stood frozen, waiting, but the sound didn't come again. "Get a grip," he told himself, wiping his face. The mine was messing with his head, that's all. He turned back to the lock, doubling down. This time, he used his body weight, throwing everything he had into it. The shackle snapped with a loud crack, and the lock hit the floor, clanging against the stone. Ethan flinched, the noise too loud in the dead silence. He waited, half expecting something to come charging out of the dark. Nothing did. He grabbed the door's handle, cold and heavy, and pulled. It didn't budge. He pulled harder, muscles straining, until the hinges screamed and the door lurched open. A blast of frigid air hit him, carrying a stench so foul it made him gag. Rotting meat mixed with that chemical burn. Ethan stumbled back, covering his nose with his sleeve. His flashlight barely pierced the darkness beyond the door, revealing a narrow stone staircase spiraling down into nothing. The walls were carved with more of those twisted sun symbols, deeper and more frantic, like whoever made them was losing their mind. Ethan's gut screamed at him to turn back, to get the hell out while he still could. But his feet were already moving, drawn to the darkness like a moth to a flame. He took a deep breath, chalked an X on the doorframe, and started down the stairs. "Here we go," he whispered, his voice trembling. The mine had shown him its teeth. Now it was time to see its heart. Ethan's boots scraped against the stone stairs as he descended, each step echoing like a gunshot in the tight spiral. The air was so cold it burned his lungs, and the stench, rotting flesh mixed with that chemical tang, made his stomach lurch. His flashlight flickered again, the beam barely cutting through the dark. He tapped it against his palm, muttering, "Don't quit on me now." The GoPro's battery warning blinked red, but he ignored it. Whatever was down here, he needed to see it, needed to know. The staircase ended abruptly, opening into a cavernous chamber that dwarfed anything he'd seen in the mine. His flashlight swept across the space, revealing walls carved with those twisted sun symbols, now so dense they overlapped like a madman's scribbles. The floor was slick with black slime, reflecting the light in sickening glints. But it was the center of the room that stopped Ethan cold. Massive glass tanks, each as tall as a man, lined the far wall. They were filled with a cloudy green liquid, and inside things floated. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. He stepped closer, his boots sticking to the floor. The tanks held bodies, human but wrong. They had no heads. Their skin was pale, almost translucent, stitched together with thick, clumsy sutures. Arms and legs hung limp, swaying gently in the liquid like they were caught in a current. Ethan counted 6 tanks, each with its own headless corpse, perfectly preserved, not a hint of decay. "What the hell is this?" he whispered, his voice shaking. He forced himself to move, circling the tanks. His flashlight caught details he wished it hadn't. Scars crisscrossing the bodies, metal pins jutting from their spines, tubes running from their chests into the tank walls. This wasn't just a graveyard. It was a lab. A sick, twisted lab. Ethan's mind raced back to the papers upstairs. The German words, experiment, subject. They were testing on people, he said, bile rising in his throat. Soldiers, prisoners, God knows who. He spotted a desk in the corner, piled with notebooks and glass vials. He grabbed one of the books, its leather cover cracked and stained. The pages were filled with handwritten notes, diagrams of human bodies with parts circled and crossed out. One word kept appearing, Unsterblich. Ethan didn't know German, but it didn't sound good. He stuffed the notebook into his backpack, his hands trembling. Evidence, he told himself. Gotta show the world. That's when he felt it. A prickle on the back of his neck, like someone was breathing just behind him. He spun, flashlight slashing through the dark. Nothing. Just the tanks, the bodies, the silence. But the feeling didn't go away. It grew heavy and sharp, like eyes boring into his skull. Ethan's heart pounded. "Come on, show yourself," he said, his voice louder than he meant. The words echoed, mocking him. Then he saw it. A flicker of movement, just beyond the tanks. His flashlight caught a shape, tall, hunched, too thin to be human. It was gone before he could focus, melting into the shadows. Ethan's mouth went dry. "No way," he said, stepping back. His boot hit something hard, a metal pipe, clattering across the floor. The noise was deafening, and in its wake, he heard something new. A low, rasping hiss, like air leaking from a punctured lung. It came from the far side of the chamber, where the light didn't reach. Ethan's instincts screamed at him to run, but his legs wouldn't move. He swung the flashlight toward the sound, catching only stone and shadow. The hiss came again, closer this time, followed by a scrape, like claws on rock. "Who's there?" he shouted, his voice cracking. No answer, but the air felt heavier, charged with something alive and wrong. He backed toward the stairs, flashlight shaking in his hand. "I'm not afraid of you," he lied, gripping the multi-tool in his pocket. The tanks loomed beside him, the bodies inside still and silent. But as he passed the closest one, he swore he saw it twitch, a finger curling, slow and deliberate. Ethan froze, staring. The body didn't move again, but the green liquid rippled, like something had stirred it. "No," he whispered, shaking his head. "No, no, no." His mind was playing tricks. Had to be. Dead things didn't move. He turned to run, but the hiss was right behind him now, so close he felt its heat. Ethan spun, flashlight raised, and for a split second he saw it. A pair of eyes, red and glowing, set in a face that wasn't a face. It was gone before he could scream, leaving only darkness. His chest heaved, panic clawing at him. He stumbled toward the stairs, slipping on the slime, his flashlight flickering worse than ever. "I gotta get out," he gasped, reaching the staircase. But as he took the first step, a deep, grinding rumble shook the chamber. Dust rained from the ceiling, and the walls groaned like they were alive. Ethan froze, heart in his throat. The rumble grew louder, and then boom! The ceiling above the stairs collapsed. Tons of rock crashing down, sealing the only way out. Ethan dove back, barely avoiding the debris. When the dust settled, the staircase was gone, replaced by a wall of rubble. Ethan's ears rang from the collapse, dust choking the air like a thick fog. He coughed, waving his hand to clear it, but the darkness pressed in closer, heavier than ever. His flashlight lay a few feet away, its beam flickering weakly against the rubble that now blocked the stairs. The only way out was gone, buried under tons of rock. He was trapped in the belly of the mine with those tanks, those bodies, and whatever the hell was watching him. "Shit!" he whispered, scrambling to grab the flashlight. The light sputtered, barely strong enough to show his own hands. He smacked it against his palm, cursing under his breath. "Come on, don't do this to me." The beam steadied, just enough to light up the chamber. The glass tanks loomed in the corner, their headless corpses floating silently, like they were waiting for something. Ethan's skin crawled. He couldn't shake the feeling that they were watching him, even without eyes. He checked the GoPro on his chest. The battery was dead, the red light gone. "Great," he muttered, ripping it off and shoving it into his backpack. No more footage, no more proof. Just him, alone, in a tomb of stone and nightmares. His heart hammered, but he forced himself to breathe, slow and deep. "Think, Ethan. You've been in tight spots before. You'll get out of this." But the words felt like lies. He turned to the rubble, clawing at the rocks with his bare hands. They were heavy, jagged, cutting into his palms. Blood smeared the stones, but he kept digging, desperation driving him. "There's gotta be a gap," he said, voice hoarse. "Gotta be something." But the pile didn't budge. It was solid, immovable, like the mine itself was fighting him. After 10 minutes, he collapsed against the wall, panting, his hands raw and stinging. "No way out," he whispered, the truth sinking in. That's when he heard it. A scream, sharp and human, echoing through the chamber. Ethan's head snapped up, flashlight darting toward the sound. It wasn't close, but it was real, not some trick of the mine. It came again, louder. A man's voice, raw with pain. "Help me!" it begged, then dissolved into a gurgling wail. Ethan's blood ran cold. "Who's there?" he shouted, his voice bouncing off the walls. No answer, just the echo of that scream, fading into silence. He stood, legs shaking, and swept the flashlight across the room. The tanks were still, the bodies unmoving. But the air felt different now, charged with something he couldn't name. His mind flashed to the papers, the word UNSTRBLIC. Immortal. Were those screams from the past, trapped in the stone? Or was someone, still down here with him? Ethan gripped the flashlight tighter, his knuckles white. I'm not crazy, he told himself. I'm not. But then the shadows moved. Not fast, but deliberate, sliding along the wall like ink spreading through water. Ethan's flashlight caught them, but they vanished when the beam hit, leaving only stone. He backed up, his boots slipping on the slime. Show yourself, he yelled, his voice cracking. The shadows moved again, closer, and with them came that hiss from before, low and guttural, like a snake sizing up its prey. Ethan's heart pounded so hard he thought it had burst. He swung the flashlight wildly, catching a glimpse of those red eyes again, glowing in the dark. They were higher now, closer, and they didn't blink. Oh, God! Ethan whispered, stumbling back. His foot caught on a pipe, and he fell, the flashlight skidding across the floor. The beam spun, casting wild shadows that danced like ghosts. Ethan scrambled for it, his hands shaking so bad he could barely grip it. When he finally got it, he aimed the light where the eyes had been. Nothing. Just the tanks, the desk, the symbols on the walls. But he knew what he'd seen. Something was here, hunting him. He crawled to the desk, using it to pull himself up. His eyes caught a piece of paper stuck to the floor, half buried in slime. He grabbed it, hands trembling. It was a sketch, a human figure, headless, with wires and tubes running through it. Below it, in shaky handwriting, were the words, "IT controls them." Ethan's stomach dropped. "Controls what?" he said, voice barely audible. He looked at the tanks, at the bodies floating inside. A chill ran through him. Were they alive? Another scream tore through the chamber, this one so close it felt like it was inside his skull. Ethan dropped the paper, clapping his hands over his ears. The scream wasn't just sound. It was pain, rage, 1,000 voices trapped in one. He saw flashes in his mind. Men strapped to tables, needles piercing their skin, blood pooling on the floor. He blinked hard, trying to shake it off, but the images kept coming, sharper, realer. "Stop it!" he shouted, slamming his fist against the desk. The visions faded, but the scream lingered, echoing in his bones. Ethan sank to his knees, gasping. The mind wasn't just a place. It was alive, and it was inside his head. And somewhere in the dark, those red eyes were still watching, waiting for him to break. Ethan's knees ached against the slimy floor, his breath ragged as he tried to shake the screams still ringing in his head. The flashlight in his hand flickered, casting jagged shadows across the chamber. The tanks loomed like silent sentinels, their headless bodies floating in that sickly green liquid. He couldn't look at them without feeling like they were staring back, waiting. The mine was toying with him, breaking him down piece by piece. And those red eyes, he knew they were still out there, watching from the dark. "Get up, Ethan," he growled, forcing himself to stand. His hands were bloody from digging at the rubble, his flashlight barely clinging to life. The paper he'd found, "IT controls them," burned in his mind. Whatever it was, it wasn't human. And those bodies in the tanks, they weren't just dead. Not anymore. He glanced at the nearest tank, its occupants still and lifeless. Or was it? The liquid rippled again, a slow, deliberate wave, like something inside had shifted. A sound snapped him out of it. A wet, heavy thud, like meat hitting stone. It came from the far side of the chamber, near the tanks. Ethan's heart lurched. He swung the flashlight, the beam catching the edge of a tank. Nothing. Just the green glow of the liquid, the pale limbs floating inside. But then it came again, louder, closer. Thud, thud, like footsteps, slow and deliberate. Ethan's mouth went dry. "No way," he whispered, backing up. His boot hit the desk, rattling the vials on top. Then he saw it. The tank closest to him was empty. The body was gone. Ethan's stomach dropped. He swung the flashlight wildly, searching the shadows. "Where are you?" he shouted, voice cracking. The answer came faster than he wanted. A shape lurched into the light, tall, headless, its stitched-up torso glistening with green slime. Its arms hung low, fingers twitching like they were waking up. It staggered toward him, each step a sickening slap against the floor. Ethan screamed, stumbling back. "Stay away!" he yelled, grabbing a metal pipe from the desk. The thing didn't stop. It moved slowly, but there was a strength in its gait, like it could crush him without trying. Ethan swung the pipe, aiming for its chest. The blow landed with a dull crunch, but the creature barely flinched. Kept coming, arms reaching, fingers curling like they wanted to tear him apart. Panic took over. Ethan swung again, harder, aiming for the shoulder. The pipe sank into the flesh, and a spray of green liquid splattered his face, burning his skin. He gagged, wiping it away, but the thing grabbed his arm, its grip like iron. Ethan yelled, twisting free, and bolted for the other side of the chamber. The creature followed, slower but relentless, its footsteps echoing like a death knell. He ducked behind a tank, heart pounding so hard he thought it had burst. The flashlight flickered, plunging him into darkness for a split second before coming back. "Don't die on me," he begged, smacking it. The beam steadied, revealing the creature just feet away, its headless torso tilting like it could sense him. Ethan's mind raced. He needed a plan, something to stop it. His eyes darted to the desk, to the vials and beakers. Chemicals. Maybe. He sprinted to the desk, grabbing a glass bottle filled with dark liquid. The creature was close now, its fingers brushing his backpack. Ethan didn't think. He smashed the bottle against the tank, splashing the liquid across the creature's chest. It hissed, a sound like steam escaping, and the air filled with a sharp, acrid smell. The creature staggered, its skin bubbling where the liquid hit. Ethan didn't wait to see what happened. He ran, circling back to the tanks, looking for anything to use. That's when he heard the hiss again. Not from the creature, but from the dark. Those red eyes appeared, glowing like embers, high above the tanks. Ethan froze, the pipe slipping in his sweaty grip. The eyes didn't move, but he felt them, heavy and cruel, like they were peeling back his skin. A voice, not a voice, but a feeling, slithered into his mind. "Stay," it whispered. "Join us." Ethan shook his head, clutching his temples. "Get out of my head," he screamed. The creature lunged, snapping him back to reality. Ethan dove, rolling across the floor as its arms smashed into a tank. Glass shattered, green liquid flooding the chamber, soaking his jeans. The smell was unbearable, like death and bleach mixed together. Ethan scrambled to his feet, pipe raised, but the creature was slowing, its movements jerky. The chemical had done something, melted its stitches, maybe, or burned whatever held it together. Took one last step, then collapsed, its body dissolving into a steaming puddle. Ethan panted, leaning against a tank, his whole body shaking. "Holy shit!" he gasped, wiping sweat from his eyes. But the victory felt hollow. Those red eyes were still there, watching from the shadows. And now, a new sound filled the chamber. A low, rhythmic thumping, coming from the other tanks. Ethan's blood ran cold. He turned, flashlight trembling, and saw the remaining bodies twitching, their fingers scraping against the glass. They were waking up. Ethan's chest heaved as he stared at the tanks, the thumping growing louder, like a heartbeat echoing through the chamber. The headless bodies inside were moving now, their fingers clawing at the glass, slow but relentless. The green liquid churned, bubbles rising as if the tanks themselves were alive. His flashlight flickered, casting wild shadows that made the scene even worse. The puddle of the dissolved creature still steamed on the floor, its chemical stink burning his lungs. Ethan gripped the metal pipe, his hands slick with sweat and blood. He was out of tricks, out of time. "Stay back," he whispered, though he knew they couldn't hear him. The words were for himself, a desperate attempt to hold it together. Those red eyes were still out there, lurking in the dark, and that voice in his head, "Stay. Join us." Kept slithering back, colder and sharper each time. Ethan shook his head, trying to drown it out, but it was like the mine itself was inside him, picking at his fears. He stumbled to the desk, the only place that might hold answers. Papers and notebooks were scattered everywhere, some stuck to the floor with slime. He grabbed the nearest one, its pages brittle and stained. The handwriting was frantic, German words mixed with sketches of those sun symbols. Ethan's eyes caught a phrase, "Das Wesen," the entity. Below it was a drawing, a tall, hunched figure with no face, just a void where eyes should be. Red ink circled where its eyes would have been, jagged and uneven, like the artist was terrified. Ethan's stomach twisted. "This is it," he said, voice barely audible. He flipped the page, finding more. The notes described experiments, soldiers, prisoners, anyone they could grab, used to create Unsterblich warriors. Immortal, but something went wrong. They didn't just want soldiers. They wanted control. The scientists had summoned something, a thing from beyond, to bind the bodies to their will. The entity. It was supposed to obey, but it didn't. It turned on them, trapping their souls in the mine, using the bodies as puppets. The last line was scrawled in a shaking hand, "IT never sleeps." Ethan dropped the notebook, his hands shaking. "They brought you here," he said, staring into the dark where the red eyes had been. "And you're still here." The thumping from the tanks grew louder, glass creaking under the pressure. A crack splintered across one, green liquid seeping out. Ethan backed up, pipe raised, his heart pounding so hard it hurt. "You're not getting me," he said, defiance mixing with fear. The air shifted, heavy and electric, and the voice came again, not in his head but out loud, a guttural rasp that filled the chamber. "You cannot leave." Ethan spun, flashlight slashing through the dark, but the entity was nowhere. The red eyes appeared again, high above the tanks, unblinking. They weren't just watching now, they were commanding. The tanks exploded into motion, glass shattering as the bodies broke free. 5 of them, headless and dripping, staggered toward him, their stitched limbs moving with unnatural strength. Ethan ran, slipping on the slime, his flashlight bouncing wildly. "No, no, no!" he shouted, dodging an arm that swung at his head. He swung the pipe, cracking it against a body's chest, but it barely slowed. Another grabbed his backpack, yanking him back. Ethan twisted free, the strap tearing, and sprinted for the far wall, where he'd seen a narrow crevice during the collapse. It was small, maybe too small, but it was his only shot. He dove for it, scraping his shoulders against the stone as he squeezed inside. The bodies followed, their fingers clawing at the opening, but they were too big to fit. Ethan pressed himself deeper, the walls so tight he could barely breathe. His flashlight flickered out, plunging him into total darkness. "Come on," he gasped, smacking it. The beam sputtered back, faint but enough to show the crevice stretching ahead, barely wide enough for his body. The bodies pounded on the stone outside, their thumps shaking dust into his face. Ethan coughed, crawling forward, his knees and elbows raw. The voice came again, closer now, like it was right behind him. "You are mine." Ethan's mind reeled, flashes of the scientist's fate. Screaming, bleeding, trapped forever, flooding his vision. He saw himself, headless, floating in a tank, his soul chained to the entity. "No!" he screamed, slamming his fist against the wall. The visions shattered, but the fear stayed, clawing at his chest. He kept crawling, the crevice narrowing until he thought he'd get stuck. His flashlight died again, leaving him blind. Panic surged, but he forced himself to move, inch by inch, until his hand brushed something new. Cold, smooth stone, wider than the crevice. A chamber? A way out? Ethan didn't know. but he had to keep going. The thumping behind him faded, but the entity's presence didn't. It was still there, waiting, its red eyes burning in his mind. Ethan's breath came in short, ragged gasps as he crawled through the crevice, the stone walls scraping his shoulders raw. The darkness was total now, his flashlight dead, leaving him blind and fumbling. The air was thick, sour with the chemical stench that clung to everything in this cursed mine. Behind him, the thumping of the headless bodies had faded, but the entity's presence was stronger than ever. Its voice, "You are mine," echoed in his skull, not just words but a weight, pressing down like it wanted to crush his soul. Ethan gritted his teeth, clawing forward. "Not today," he growled, his voice hoarse but defiant. His hand brushed smooth stone, and the crevice widened slightly, enough for him to sit up. He fumbled in his backpack, fingers shaking as he searched for anything useful. The GoPro was dead, the multi-tool bent from prying the lock, but then his hand closed around something cold and heavy. A grenade, one of the rusted relics he'd found in the chamber upstairs. He'd grabbed it on a whim, half expecting it to be a dud. Now it was his only shot. "Please work," he whispered, clutching it like a lifeline. The crevice ended at a wall, but it wasn't solid rock. His fingers traced cracks, loose dirt, and something that felt like a seam, a weak spot. Maybe another chamber, maybe a way out. Ethan didn't care. He had to try. He wedged the multi-tool into the seam, prying with all his strength. Dirt crumbled, but the wall held. "Come on," he shouted, slamming his shoulder against it. Pain shot through him, but he kept going, desperation fueling every move. That's when the air changed, colder, heavier, like a storm rolling in. The entity was here. Ethan froze, his breath hitching. Red eyes glowed in the dark, not 10 feet away, floating high above the ground. They weren't just eyes anymore. They were fire, burning into him, stripping away every ounce of courage. The entity's form emerged, a towering shadow, its body a twisted mass of smoke and bone. No face, just a void where one should be. Its voice filled the crevice. Not a whisper now but a roar. "Join us. Become eternal." Ethan's mind reeled. Images flooded in. Soldiers screaming, their heads severed, their bodies stitched into monsters. He saw himself, headless, marching with the others, trapped forever in the mine's curse. "No!" he screamed, clutching his head. The visions were so real he could feel the cold steel of the scalpel, the burn of the chemicals. But Ethan Carter didn't give up. Not in jungles, not in shipwrecks, and not here. He yanked the pin from the grenade, his hands shaking so bad he nearly dropped it. "You want me?" he shouted, staring into those red eyes. "Come and get me." He hurled the grenade at the weak spot in the wall, diving back as far as the crevice allowed. The explosion was deafening, a shock wave that slammed him against the stone. Dust and debris rained down, choking him, but when the smoke cleared, the wall was gone. A jagged hole opened into a new tunnel, its air fresher, like it led somewhere outside. Ethan scrambled through, ignoring the pain in his shoulder, the blood dripping from his hands. The tunnel was narrow but sloped upward, a faint draft brushing his face. Hope flared in his chest, the first real hope since he'd entered the mine. "I'm getting out," he gasped, crawling faster. But the entity wasn't done. Its roar shook the tunnel, louder than the grenade, and the red eyes appeared again, closer, filling the space with their hateful glow. Ethan didn't stop. He crawled, dragging himself over sharp rocks, his body screaming in protest. The entity's voice clawed at his mind, "You will never leave," but he blocked it out, focusing on the draft, the promise of freedom. The tunnel widened, and he saw it, a faint glow ahead, not the green of the tanks but the gray of daylight. His heart leaped. "Almost there," he panted, pushing harder. But the entity struck. A force, invisible but heavy, slammed into him, pinning him to the ground. Ethan gasped, his ribs creaking under the pressure. The red eyes hovered above, so close he could feel their heat. The entity's form solidified, its smoky limbs reaching for him, fingers like blades. Ethan thrashed, kicking at the air, but it was like fighting a nightmare. "Get off me!" he screamed, swinging the broken multi-tool. Passed through the entity, doing nothing. In a last surge of defiance, Ethan rolled, breaking free, and sprinted for the light. The entity roared, the tunnel shaking, rocks falling behind him. He didn't look back. He ran, stumbling, until the gray glow became a real opening. A crack in the hillside, just wide enough to squeeze through. Ethan dove for it, clawing at the dirt, and burst into the forest, collapsing in the cold, wet grass. He lay there, gasping, the sky above a dull gray. The mine's entrance loomed behind him, a black maw in the earth. Ethan's body ached. His hands bled, but he was out. He'd made it. But as he staggered to his feet, the entity's voice echoed one last time, faint but clear. "I will find you." Ethan's blood ran cold. He turned, half expecting those red eyes in the trees. Nothing, just silence. Ethan lay in the wet grass, his chest heaving, the cold forest air biting at his torn skin. The gray sky above was the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen, but it couldn't erase the weight of the mine behind him. Its entrance gaped like a wound in the hillside, silent but alive, watching. His hands, crusted with blood and dirt, clutched the grass as if letting go would pull him back into the dark. He'd escaped the black grave, but the entity's last words, "I will find you," clung to him like a shadow. He staggered to his feet, every muscle screaming. His backpack was gone, lost in the tunnel along with the notebook, the GoPro, all proof of what he'd seen. The grenade's explosion had saved him, but at what cost? His shoulder throbbed, his hands were shredded, and his mind was a mess. Those red eyes, the headless bodies, the voice, they weren't just memories. They felt alive, burrowing into him. Ethan shook his head, muttering, "You're out. You're safe." But he didn't believe it. The forest was quiet, too quiet, the trees looming like silent judges. Ethan stumbled toward the village, his boots sinking into the mud. Took hours, maybe more, he lost track. When he finally saw the faint glow of lights through the trees, relief hit him like a wave. The village was small, a cluster of old houses and a single bar. He burst into the bar, dripping wet and wild-eyed, startling the handful of locals inside. "Help!" he croaked, his voice barely working. "The mine! Something's down there." The old men stared, their faces hard. One, the same guy who'd warned him about the black grave, stood and pointed at the door. "We told you," he said, his accent thick. "You woke it." Ethan tried to explain the tanks, the bodies, the entity, but the words tumbled out in a jumbled mess. The locals didn't listen. They called a doctor, who patched his wounds and gave him a bed in a cramped clinic. No one asked for details. No one wanted to know. Days later, Ethan was back in the States, holed up in his apartment in Chicago. The cuts on his hands had scabbed over, but the scars in his mind were fresh. He couldn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw those red eyes, heard the entity's voice. He started writing it all down, every detail, hundreds of pages, scribbled in notebooks that piled up on his desk. "Someone has to know," he told himself, his voice shaking. "Someone has to stop it." He tried to move on. He got a job at a hardware store, stopped posting on YouTube, avoided his old adventuring buddies. But the mine followed him. At night, he'd wake up gasping, certain he'd heard that guttural hiss in his room. Shadows moved in the corners of his apartment, too quick to catch. Once, he found a sun symbol scratched into his doorframe, faint but unmistakable. "It's not real," he'd whisper, scrubbing it away. But deep down, he knew better. One night, 6 months after Poland, Ethan sat at his desk, the latest notebook open in front of him. He was writing about the entity, how it controlled the bodies, how it wanted him. His hand shook, the pen digging into the paper. The room was quiet, the city hum outside his window the only sound. Then he felt it, a prickle on his neck, like a breath too close. His heart stopped. Slowly, he turned to the mirror on the wall. Red eyes stared back. They weren't his. They glowed, fierce and unblinking, set in a void where his reflection should have been. Ethan screamed, knocking the notebook to the floor. The eyes vanished, leaving only his own terrified face. He grabbed the mirror, smashing it against the wall, glass shattering across the room. "Leave me alone!" he yelled, his voice breaking. But the air felt heavy, charged, like the mine had found him again. Ethan sank to the floor, surrounded by broken glass and scattered pages. The entity wasn't gone. It had followed him just like it promised. He looked at the notebook, its pages open to a single line he'd written over and over. "I have to go back." He didn't want to, but he knew he couldn't run forever. The black grave was waiting, and so was the entity, and next time it wouldn't let him go.